What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Eastern Frickin' Current. We just tried to start recording, got a little bit into it, and it crashed. So here we are again, just dealing with these technical difficulties. We are, as far as podcasting goes, we're way behind. I started with a nice fat setup and slowly just trickled down to just the simplicity of it. So I apologize that our audio is not always perfect, that our video quality is not as good as it can be. But what we're trying to do is just bring y'all good weekly content that hopefully you're learning something from. So if you're okay with our crappy quality, say something in the comments. Say, hey, we don't care. We just like the content. And boost our morale, because right now I'm feeling defeated. But today we're going to talk about summer trout fishing. We're going to have a really good summer here in North Carolina. I know South Carolina is as well, Virginia. Lots of fish around, really good water quality this year, a little bit less rain, so the salinity level is really nice for these fish to stick around in these more southern states on the East Coast, as well as make their migrations up into the Chesapeake Bay and spawn and do all that stuff. I guess I don't even know if they spawn it there, but I think they do spawn up in the Chesapeake Bay. But we got a bunch of fat females around right now, some big males, and it's just a really good time to get out there and trout fish. It really rounds out your day nicely when you can go redfish on the tide's not great for redfish. You can go target flounder and trout. So we're going to share with y'all how to locate the spots that these fish like to hang out at in the summer, as well as some of the tackle and tactics that we like to use to target these fish and to catch these fish. Before we get into it, I want to thank Marshwear and Aftco, two great clothing companies that are big supporters of this show, as well as iStrike Fishing. And I am going to say, because it's the time of year of the Texas Eye, that if you have not fished the iStrike Texas Eye, definitely need to pick some up. Really, really awesome baits for targeting redfish, whether you're sight fishing or blind casting. Just a really good presentation. If you slow roll the bait or swim the bait back in, really good presentation. Jigging it works really, really well with a lot of Z-Mans. One thing I'm going to be fishing more of this year is a lot of the creature baits on that Texas Eye when I'm actually sight fishing redfish. Those creature baits just have really good action with very little movement of the rod tip, and the redfish do like to eat them. I think they oftentimes think they're a shrimp or a crab. Whew, I'm out of breath. I'm just talking. But
but yeah, a lot of information.
Marshwear, Aftco, iStrike, check them out. Great dudes. And I'm going to bring on Cameron here so I can get a breath. What's up, man?
Not too much.
Oh, I'm not even going to ask you all the questions I asked the first time through. We're just going to get right into the meat of it. How has your fishing been so far this summer? Summer?
It's been pretty good. I'd say that the trout has been better than I can remember, at least in the past few years. And it's kind of interesting because the first couple of years of fishing, I'd say I was mostly targeting redfish like year round.
Yeah.
And then as not getting burnt out on them, but just trying to expand my knowledge of the inshore fishery and what else can you catch in certain seasons and whatnot. The summer trout is actually something that's like pretty can produce.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think it depends year to year, right? Like you said, it's been kind of a crazy spring, like barely any rain. I think we're borderline in a drought.
Yeah.
So those like brackish water areas have always tended to be better for me in the summer. Not so much like the clear water areas. I'm sure they're there, but I haven't ever had that much luck in the clear water for them like I do in the fall.
Yeah.
But the red fishing has been, kind of that transition period. Like we've talked about this before. It can be a little frustrating this time of year just because all those schools have broken up, and some days they'll be in the same spot that they were the day before, and you get back there, a week later or a few days later, and there's not a redfish to be seen.
Yeah.
And the topwater bite has, at least in a lot of the spots that have produced for me in the past, have been kind of slow for topwater. So I'm hoping that those will turn on soon, or I need to start doing some exploring.
I know it might be the year that makes us change up all our patterns, but I do like when it's different each year, because especially with the different seasons act different than the year before, because it helps me learn new stuff, learn new spots, learn new techniques and areas, and I think that's what's really cool year after year. I think I would challenge every angler out there that listens to this podcast to starting right now, going into the summer, pick either a new technique or a new fish that you really want to try to get better at this year, and spend a lot of your time doing that. Something that's very different, that makes you a little uncomfortable, that you're not as confident in. And spend a little bit of time each time you're on the water trying that. Whether it's, like you usually just go redfish in the summer, go try targeting trout and flounder for an hour or 2 hours out of your trip. Or, if you don't do much topwater fishing, pick that topwater up in the morning and don't put it down for the first hour and a half of the trip. And just push yourself. It's so easy to fall into these same patterns of fishing for the same fish in the same areas time after time because you're confident about it. And you're going to have some skunk days. You're going to have some hard days when you push yourself to try new stuff. But as you start to put new pieces together, it's just going to make you a better angler. It's going to give you more spots in your back pocket, more techniques. And I think that's something that every angler can do every season, every year. To become better is just pushing themselves to try new stuff. I mean, that's with anything in life. Like, it's so easy to just get into a pattern and get comfortable and not pick something new up. Like, I got my wife for her birthday a surfboard, and she hated it because I really wanted her to learn to surf. And I was like, oh, we can surf together. That's what we'll start doing. I used to surf a bunch. And she I think it gave her serious anxiety for a little bit. She's like, I don't want to have to learn how to surf. I'm comfortable doing what I already do. But it's good to learn new things and to challenge yourself in life as well as in your fishing. So, but yeah, it's one way that I always look at it is like typically in the spring and summer, if my grass or what I call grass, what most people would call weeds, is green, the water quality in our brackish estuaries is probably kind of off. But if it's brown like it is right now, then it's probably good salinity level in the river and the coastal rivers that we have around here, and it's pretty brown. So I've been mind blown at how well I can see way up the Cape Fear River right now, like seeing bottom and 2 feet of water, which is never. I mean, above snow's cut. I mean, a lot of y'all listening don't know where we're talking about, but I mean, you can see bottom and 2 feet of water above snow's cut, which is just crazy. But yeah, so we're going to talk about summertime trout fishing today, and I think the first kind of thing to talk about is like where to start. We'll get into lures, but what do you look for when you're looking for a trout spot in the summertime, and how does that vary from where they are in the fall, or does it vary much from where they are in the fall? Do you want to start with that, Cameron? Do you want me to start it off?
Yeah, no, I'll take a swing at it. Cool. And then you can clean me up. I do want to mention, I can't hear you like super well. I don't know if your mic is coming through your earphones or through that mic you have hooked up.
It is coming through this mic I have hooked up. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, a little bit better now.
Okay, sweet. Hopefully the podcast recording got my audio decent. I kind of had it off to the side of my body a little bit. I probably should have it out here in front of me.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit better.
Okay, cool.
I'd say probably one of the best tools, big surprise because we've talked about it a lot, is Google Maps or Google Earth, and trying to identify some deeper water sections. And I think when I say like deeper water sections, more so like sloughs, right? With like, and then those sloughs, you almost have to go there to check them out and see how the water flows through there. Is there current seams? Is there eddies? It's kind of hard to tell like that aspect of it from Google Maps. But what I've done and something that's been productive for me in the past is just identifying like a handful of those spots on Google Maps. And you can tell, the water's a little bit darker. It might be on the edge of shallower water, but somewhere that the trout are going to hold and wait for bait to just flush past them. And then you're looking for those eddies and current seams, just because that's generally where trout are going to use as like ambush points, right? Because bait's going to get pushed through there. The bait's going to get either confused or kind of dispersed due to the current or the structure or what have you, and making it fairly easy prey for a trout. But stuff like little islands, oyster bars, but I definitely wouldn't say like super shallow stuff. At least in my experience, I think you can catch some trout in the shallows if you're topwater fishing or something like that, you know?
Right, right.
But I think the most numbers for me in the past have always come from some sort of slough with some structure in it.
No, for sure. I would agree with that 100%. Um, and I think what you were saying about Google Earth too, while you were talking, I pulled it up. Can you hear me better now?
It sounds about the same.
About the same. Okay. Well, hopefully
Yeah.
the recording. Do you have the volume turned down on your computer?
It's about halfway.
Halfway,
I'll turn
okay.
it up a little bit.
But Google Earth is such a great tool for scouting and learning how to use it. I mean, it can be very intimidating to look at it at first. And I think what you got to do is kind of have some areas that are productive. Go look at those areas on Google Earth. Somewhere where you've caught trout or caught redfish, and see like what that looks like from an aerial view. And then go try to replicate that in new areas. One of the best things that
exactly.
someone's ever. Sorry, what were you saying?
I was just agreeing with you. That's like one of the points that I meant to say but forgot is looking at spots that you've caught them before and trying to find something that looks very similar via
sure.
Google Maps.
I'm trying to remember how to do this. View status, show navigation. So there's a way, and it always takes me a second to find it because I don't do it all the time, to change the year of the photo. It's down. So the bottom left corner of the image, it'll have a number. It says 1985 here, which I know that's not when this image was taken. But if you click that number at the bottom left-hand corner of the image, you can scroll through the different years. And different years will be taken at different tides, at different, water clarities, different parts of the year. And so you can kind of scroll through that and get images at low tide, get images at high tide. And so when I'm looking for trout spots, a lot of times I'll scroll around until I find a year that's got good, clean water. And then I can zoom in and I want a higher water. And a lot of times you can see those seams and those rips coming off of areas. Like I'm scrolling through an area right now that me and Cameron fish a good bit. And there are decent, very visible, checking this volume here, decent, very visible rips coming off some of the points. And it takes a second scrolling around through those years trying to pick out where those rips are, but you can see them coming off the points. And so that's just a really good tool I've used, as well as like trying to locate oyster bars or, subsurface structure that's in shallow water. If you scroll around through the years at different tides, or hoping for different tides, like it's mind blowing as I'm scrolling through it right now, the difference in the image qualities. Like, and some you'll get to a newer year, and sometimes it's worse than like the year before.
Right.
And some areas are better pictures at different times, but you can definitely see the rips well on some of these, and see some of the oyster bars.
Some of those pictures could have been taken at different tides, or on a super windy day, and when it's a little bit harder to see. So going through the years, like you said, is definitely beneficial to getting a better idea. And then kind of on the same subject as Google Maps, and something that I still don't have, but just ordered one, is one of those Navionics chips.
Yeah, the Platinum Plus.
The Platinum Plus, because it gives you a satellite overlay, which I think I never really realized like how beneficial it could be until I've been on people like your boat and Jeff's boat who has one, and you talk about like going fishing early in the morning, which is generally when you want to go for trout, especially in the warmer months. Like if you're running out and it's like not super light out, or it's low light conditions, being able to see like the channels and whatnot to run through is super helpful.
100%.
And then 2, it's like Google Maps while you're on the water, because your phone, like I've tried to pull out my phone while fishing and being like, all right, I'm out of spots, like let me look at Google Maps and see if I can find anything that looks similar to where we were catching fish earlier. And it's not super easy to see like when you're out on the boat.
It's so tough in the sun.
It is, but I feel like those GPS screens just get so bright enough that you can kind of figure your way through finding some other types of stuff that you want to fish. So.
For sure. I would agree with that too. Another great tool. I know we're not necessarily. This is just as important as anything trout fishing we're talking about, because this is going to help you with your trout fishing. But Navionics has an app. I think it's $14 for the year. That you can save spots on, you can scroll around, and it has a lot of different overlays. It has topographic overlays showing you the different depths. You can do a full satellite, but I keep it on. There's a color, I forget what it's called. It's a. I'm scrolling to look real quick. I forget how to get to it. But it gives me this color gradient across the map, and then it has like topographic. Overlay, so I'll hold my phone up for those of y'all watching, but you can kind of see the structure on the bottom through the overlay on the map, which is something you can do on the Navionics chip as well. On the chip for your GPS too, like year after year as they update their satellite imagery, you can go on, plug your SD card into the computer, go to their website, and download the new maps onto that card. You can't just go do it on like any card. You have to have that. You have to pay for the Navionics subscription and have that card, But yeah, so there's a lot of tools before you're ever even on the water. And a lot of times, like when I'm sitting on the toilet in the morning, like thinking about my day, I pull up my Navionics app and I'm like scrolling through it and thinking about which way the wind's blowing, thinking about where I've seen fish, where I've caught fish. And it just constantly like looking at this satellite imagery and looking from a bird's eye view down at it as you're thinking about like what happened yesterday, where were the fish doing, where was the bait moving, like all these things will start to pop in your head of like, oh, this area will probably be good. You know, it's got a good shallow edge. You got a deep point for these trout to sit on. The bait was over here, and that current's going to be falling in the morning, so a lot of that bait might be getting sucked around this point or into this, out of this creek mouth. So using those things, I mean, some people don't want to do that. They just want to be the kind of people that are like, all right, I just want to go get on the water, go throw a topwater plug, and not think too hard about it. But for myself, like, it's a science and it's a job, and it's like I get a lot of satisfaction out of like putting things together that way and doing like my off the water homework as well, which maybe that's the whole reason or a big part of the whole podcast and everything is just like talking fishing all the time and constantly trying to become better. But is that better?
Yeah.
I swung out in front of it for a second. And I'm just going to talk like this from behind it the whole time.
Yeah, talk right.
I'm sorry for everyone that's just listening to this podcast because it's got to suck. But, golly, I suck at this whole mic thing. Like I said, I'm glad I gave the whole spiel at the beginning of the podcast. Sorry for our terrible quality. But use those apps. Use the chip. What is the chip? It's like $325, I think, something like that.
No, mine was. I hope I got the right one. It was like
150 maybe,
180 or something like that.
That's probably right. It's been a while since I bought it.
Yeah, I feel like I looked at buying it a few years ago, and I was like, oh man, that's kind of expensive. I can't do that. And then I looked at it again. Like I probably ordered mine 5 days ago, and for some reason I thought it may have been cheaper. So doesn't really
probably
matter,
was. I was probably wrong. It's been a while since I bought one, but
yeah. So I'm excited to be able to use that for multiple reasons, like we talked about.
Yeah, for sure. It's super helpful. But we'll move into specifically, trouty areas. Like Cameron talked about it for a little bit. Personally, these fish will hang out in a lot of the similar areas that you catch them in the fall. I mean, they hang out in those areas because certain things. They can be near a good current, but have a current break usually, something they can sit in and expend less energy. It's a good bait funnel for them. And they've got good shallow water to deep water access. Those are like the three main points that you want for trout. And then like salinity level and all that can play a factor as well. But current, an ability to kind of like hold in the current well, maybe that's a current break. And fish will oftentimes like hold in a certain area and then slide into their feeding zone where they're going to spend more energy a little bit, but they can get a lot of feeding in. I've got specific areas in mind that I'm thinking about that have been productive lately. But we had a big a fish just under 25 inches the other day on a DOA shrimp, and it was on a heavy current rip off this little tiny knuckle. Like I call a knuckle like just a small little point that sticks off a bank. Maybe it could be like 3 feet out, but it's enough to cause like a little seam or a current break. And we caught 3 fish over 21 inches in a row, bang, bang, bang. like 3 casts in a row, and they were all sitting like 2 feet into the slack water, like across the seam, and like you throw it way back up in the seam, and then right as it started to move in that fast water, like right as it was starting to get into it, they'd eat it. So those fish are just sitting there holding just close enough to the fast water that when that bait comes by, they can slide out and eat it and move back over into that soft edge. But it's funny with trout how like you can be set up on a spot like that, and the guy on the front of the boat cannot be catching them, and the guy on the back of the boat can be catching them, and you're both fishing it the right way. It's like getting that exact right swing. So just because you threw 2 or 3, even 15, 20 casts into an area from one exact angle, before you leave a spot, kind of shift around it and hit it from a couple angles. I'm not saying like the opposite direction, but hit it from up high and then drop the boat like equal distant with it, like directly off from it, and hit it and then drop below it. Changing the way that bait's traveling through there can really affect if you're going to get bit or not. Because these trout, like I said, are holding in specific areas, and they might not go for that bait that's 5 feet away or even 3 feet away, but when it's 2 feet away from them, they're going to swim over and eat it. So I think that's a really important part. And they're going to spend more energy this time of year, kind of like early fall, because the water's warm. They're not trying to survive in the cold, but still putting it on their dinner plate is always beneficial. If it's right in front of them, they're probably going to eat it.
There's no doubt.
But yeah, finding those feeding areas is important. And how long would you say, like if you're let's say you're along a slough or an edge that's got a couple points and a couple seams and current breaks and whatnot, like as you're working through that zone, hitting the multiple spots in there, how long do you spend per spot?
I'd say I give to go kind of back to your point about like where you're casting and how a guy on the back might be catching fish more so than the guy on the front. Sometimes I think that has to do with like how that bait is sitting in the water, right? So if the guy on the front is casting way up current, then that bait is going to generally be like a little deeper, depending on how he's working it. But like if they're both working it the same, right? The guy in the front and the guy in the back, then the one that's getting the bait is coming towards the boat or alongside the boat is generally going to be a little deeper, I think. And then the guy that's fishing off the back of the boat, maybe he's fishing, at a 90-degree angle to the bank. Well, once that thing swings, it's going to lift up that bait,
100%.
right? And so I try to do like a couple casts up current, a couple casts at like a 90-degree angle, and then I'll do a couple casts straight off the back of the boat, because I've had so many times where the cast off the back of the boat and that bringing that bait up in the water column is like where they want it.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'd say 3 to 4 casts in each direction takes 10 minutes maybe.
Yeah.
So I'd say 10 or 15 minutes probably per spot. If it looks really good, then I might stay there for 20 minutes and try a couple different lures maybe. But I wouldn't stay, me personally, wouldn't stay any longer than 20 minutes if I hadn't gotten a bite.
Yeah, that's kind of how I am too, and I might even be a little quicker than you a lot of times, and that's my downfall sometimes. A lot of times that's my downfall, is not milking a spot. There's been a lot of times trout fishing that I've kind of been all up and down a bank. I'm like, maybe I caught them there 5 days before, and I'm like, I know they're here. And you finally stumble into the rhythm, you find the right spot, and you'll catch 10 or 12 fish. And there are spots in the summer where you find them wadded up really good, and you can catch them good. But more times than not, it's like 3 or 4 per spot. Maybe 5 to 8 on a good spot. And that. Some spots are bigger and can hold more fish, but as they become more aggressive in these warmer months, they want to spread out and have, better opportunity to feed. If they're sitting there with 50 other trout, they're going to have a harder time getting that bait. There's safety in numbers. You'll definitely find areas, especially like some of the heavier flow areas or bigger spots, that the fish will pile up a little bit better. But, if you fished it, I would say I see a lot of people, make this mistake trout fishing. They catch 5 or 10 pretty quick, and then they sit there for an hour. And maybe catch one more or 2 more. But if they're feeding good there, they're feeding good in other spots. So they're feeding good. Don't sit there and try to milk that spot for another fish. Try to go find another spot that has fish, because there's a really good chance they're feeding all over if you're in that window. Granted, some spots are different. Some spots fish better at like the tail end of a fall or the top of a rise. But if you're on a good feed, moving after you've kind of picked those first couple aggressive fish out of an area, I think is a great way to learn more spots as well as catch more fish.
Yeah, that's a super good point, and something I'm definitely guilty of. Being like, man, I know there's more down there, but you got to think, the first few fish you catch out of that hole or that slough or that bank is, like you said, probably the most aggressive ones.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
And then there may be more down there, but they've seen, 3 or 4 fish flailing around in the water, causing a bunch of commotion. And they may have moved, or they may have just been fish that were sitting there that don't feel like eating at that point in time. So I think that's a really good point and something to remember. And then the other thing I would say, and this might be pretty obvious, but at least for me personally, when I find like a slough or something like that, I think the angle that you approach it can be pretty important as well.
For sure.
So like I like to go at the very bottom of whichever bank I'm working and go up against the current. Like if you try and angle your boat like with the current, like flowing with the current, it just like it's super hard and your boat ends up going all over the place.
For sure.
And being able to kind of sneak up to those banks slowly and quietly, I think can help keep the bite on for a little bit longer, or what have you.
Yeah, something that people get sucked into trout fishing as well is like running up to your spot and like killing it pretty close and starting to fish. Because I feel like you can get away with it, in the fall when a lot of people are trout fishing when they're piled up, real schooled up together, because they don't want to move. But this time of year, I think you can definitely hurt it if you're motoring. Like my buddy Elias, I was talking to him, and he's been catching some really big trout in the morning on topwater. But he's been fishing areas that do get decent amounts of boat traffic, and he'll catch them. He'll be catching these trout pretty good until the first boat runs by, and the boat will come running by, and the bite's done. At least of those bigger fish. And so keeping that in mind, that those fish are very sensitive and maybe not feeding. They're picking their windows. I think they're pretty stealthy fish, and they're kind of picking their windows to eat, especially the big fish, and then hanging low. Another thing too is like the trout will really start to school up with fish their size this time of year. So if you're sitting there hitting a bunch of dinks, not that you can't pull a good fish out of there, but try to find a spot where those fish are, maybe a little bit better size class. So I think they get bullied around a little bit right now as these fish are kind of like pre-spawn, and those smaller fish are getting bullied by the bigger fish, and so they'll kind of spread out and do their thing separately. That's totally a theory that could not be true, but that's kind of how I feel that it is. And you'll catch those smaller fish, and they're kind of scarred up a little bit. I swear those other fish are beating up on them, but yeah. So as far as spots, traditional fall fishing spots, hit all those. But again, you think of that early fall when they're sitting in that ripping current, really trying to feed to put that weight on for the winter time. And another thing to think about too is like if you get a big fat fish this time of year, it's probably a female with a lot of eggs in it. And it's really smart to just release, to keep some fish, but I would say release as many trout as you can, but definitely release those fat ones, with those big fat bellies. It could be fat males for sure. If they're grunting, they're usually males, or they are males. If they're making that little croaker noise almost. But those big fat bellied females, man, that's the future population of trout. So if you catch those, definitely helps to let them out or let them go. There'll be more fish for you in the future.
Yeah, agreed.
So let's talk a little bit about the baits and the lures that we like to fish this time of year. Again, not much changes, but it's still important, I think, to go over some of these key baits for people that are wanting. So I'll go first, and I'll let you kind of run after it. One, the red flake DOA shrimp, and you can definitely fish a lot of colors too this time of year as these fish are more aggressive. But that red flake, in dirty water and clean water, in brackish water, super salty water, like that bait just does really, really well. And the way I fish that bait 99% of the time is just dead sticking it with some light little 1-inch, 2-inch like twitches of my rod tip every 3 to 5 seconds. Throwing it, slightly up current and letting it kind of fall with a couple twitches and swing behind the boat. I'm never reeling that bait in. I'm just twitch, and then just reeling that slack out a little bit and just letting it kind of drift in the current.
Mm-hmm.
The next bait I really like to fish is a Swimbait. Pretty much always the Z-Man Diesel Minnow in a variety of colors. But I would say if I had to pick two, I would do white, all white, like the pearl, and then red bone.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, this time of year, I'm really not jigging it. I'm throwing it, letting it sink a little bit, and just slow rolling it straight back to the boat. So just swimming that bait cross current back to me. I'll give it some little twitches every once in a while, and not that you can't catch them bouncing it, but I've been doing better this year, and typically what I do in this time of year is just slow roll it back to the boat. The other is a heavy Dean, or MR17, and these are areas, we're talking about fishing for trout and current. There's a lot of guys that fish non-current areas that the MR17, the jerk bait, the hard suspending baits, those are going to be the baits to beat this. Those are the baits to throw in those non-current areas, topwaters. But the 17 or the heavy Dean can be really good in those heavy current areas, and then a topwater plug. And don't be afraid to pick that topwater plug up. I pick a topwater plug up at every single spot, no matter what time of day it is, and throw it for 5 minutes or 3 minutes. Just make a couple casts with it, because those big fish a lot of times will come up and eat something off the surface. Even if you've seen nothing get busted, sometimes a big old mullet on the surface is what they want. But that's kind of my go-to. What about you, Cameron?
Pretty similar. It's funny because the red flake DOA was something that I always just kind of thought was a fall bait.
Yeah.
And then
so many people have that theory.
Well, I don't know why. I mean, I really don't know why. I guess because in the summer in brackish water, I kind of feel like that bait would disappear.
Yeah.
But you were like, I was talking to you the other morning before I went, and you were like, man, they were crushing the red flake. And I was like, all right. And so I tied like 2 of them on, and that was the bait for the day. So it's pretty interesting how that works. It is deadly. It is extremely deadly. But other than that, I'd say for topwaters, probably Spook Juniors.
Yeah, Spook Juniors.
I don't think color really matters all that much, at least, from my experience.
Right.
And then one thing, one bait that I want to try, because I listened to, I can't remember what it was. It was another fishing podcast I listened to. And this guy had fished topwaters for like a whole year, and it was like everything that he had learned from these topwaters. And one that he said worked super well on trout in the early spring was a small prop bait, or a small
I remember you were telling me this other day.
Yeah. So I'd be curious to try that out. People will probably think I'm crazy.
Man, I think I like the theory behind that all. So that was the recent Salt Strong podcast, right?
I think it was Salt Strong. Yeah. I don't know how recent it was, but
might have been older. What kind of prop bait was it he was fishing? Because I know you and I talked about this. Because I was like, man, I've caught the trout on a whopper plopper, but the small redfish, being like not bull redfish, I've had really run away from a whopper plopper. But I've caught the bull redfish really good on a whopper plopper. And you're like, oh no, he wasn't fishing a whopper plopper. You said just a traditional type of prop bait.
Yeah, I actually think it was wood.
Oh, nice.
And it was small. I don't know exactly, but it looked about the same size as like a Spook Junior.
Okay, sweet.
And I'm pretty sure that they're just bass lures, and a lot of them come with 2 props on them, one on the front and one on the back, or 2 on the back and 1 on the front. And he said the one that worked for him the best was just the 1 prop on the back, a small metal prop. And I think you can work in multiple different ways. You can rip it across, just like with jerks of your rod tip, or you can just consistently reel it in. But I'm not really sure. I've never fished one. But he said that he thought that the sound of that topwater was the closest that anything came to like the sound of bait fleeing. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's worth a try. But other than that, I'd say definitely paddle tails for the most part, and then like I'm a big fan of popping cork with the voodoo shrimp, man.
Dude, it's hard to beat the popping cork and voodoo shrimp.
The only problem I have with the popping cork is just like the depth deal because it's at a set depth, right? And anytime you want to adjust it, you either got to shorten your line or tie longer line on. And it's not super easy to cast for people that haven't casted a bunch.
Yeah, it's kind of like I always tell people, bring it back, let it settle, and then all forward momentum. Because if you try to like whip it, it's just like a big somersaulting mess going through the
air. Yeah. But I do love that bait for trout and redfish, honestly, in the summer. And then I think another important thing, and I don't know how important this is or if it's going to deter fish from biting your lure, but I think a lot of times matching the size of the finger mullet and whatnot that you see can be important because that's what they're used to seeing. That's what they're feeding on for the most part this time of year. I mean, I think shrimp have just kind of started showing up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, in the early spring to late spring, those mullet are pretty small.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, 2.5 inches, 3 inches or something like that.
Annoying to catch in a cast net.
Yeah, get their gills caught in the cast net holes. That's a nightmare. But yeah, and then, as it gets warmer, they obviously get bigger. But, like I said, I think if it's presented to them in a manner that is, in the right spot and in the right current and so on and so forth, they're probably still going to eat it. But anything that betters your chances, right, is always something to try. So I'll usually tie on like 2 different sizes of paddle tails, a DOA, whether that be red flake or like white or chartreuse, and then a popping cork and then a topwater.
Yeah,
kind of
like my
go-tos.
Yeah, the popping cork, like a lot of times when those fish want to eat like a suspended soft bait where like a DOA is doing really well, you got somebody that can't fish that DOA super well, that's like having trouble keeping that line tight enough, but not too tight. Throwing a shrimp on a cork like that, like a soft plastic shrimp, helps make that bait ride mid-water column. Sometimes they want it riding like perfectly parallel, like you can't do it with a cork unless it was like a center rigged soft plastic shrimp, which there are some out there.
Yeah.
But it is a good way to get that similar presentation with a simpler deal.
And I don't think it might be kind of important for trout. I think they have pretty dang good smell, but the voodoo, I mean, they are a little expensive, which kind of sucks, but they last a decent.
Yeah, you can get a lot of fish out of them.
But the voodoo on the belly of the shrimp has like a perfect little like dugout area you can squirt some of that, shrimp goop in.
A goop slot.
Do the little jelly donut action.
That's awesome. Dude, speaking about props and how effective they can be on pulling fish in, you think about spinner baits and buzz baits and all different types of props and the noise that you get off of them. We started experimenting with putting props on flies and in front of flies on our leader in Louisiana for fishing dirtier water. And it was mind-blowing. Like, you'd make a bad cast on a redfish and strip it. It might be behind the fish. And they would, didn't see it at all, but 360 on it. Or not 360 because that would be a full turnaround, but 90-degree turn and just key right in on it, come smoke it. So even subsurface props can be really, really effective. And there's actually some jig head companies out there now that are making prop jig heads. I don't know if you've seen those that are pretty cool. And there's also this bait that I've got. I bought one of them. It's like a Japanese bait that they're made. Like Berkeley makes some now and everything. The one I bought was like $28, but it's called a spy bait, and so it's like a subsurface bait. It looks almost like a little jerk bait, but there's no lip on it, and it's like a slow sinking. There's different ones. I guess they're all slow sinking, kind of like a mirror lure, but it has a prop on either end, and so you can kind of swim it straight in or twitch like a mirror lure. But it's double propped. They're called spy baits, and I've talked to some guys that have absolutely crushed the trout on them. And I think would be a really good bait to fish this time of year. I've got one in my box. I might actually try it tomorrow a little bit now that I'm talking about it because I keep meaning to. But it's so easy to just keep the dang DOA on, like when they're biting the DOA good.
Oh man, it's so easy.
But you got to think too. It's like sometimes big fish get pissed off at certain baits, and playing around with those baits if you're on a good bite can be definitely effective.
I'd say to go back to like our point of how long to stay in an area. Like if they're eating just the DOA, or that's just all you've been throwing, and that's what they've been eating, and then the bite kind of shuts off. I think I always throw like at least a couple casts with a paddle tail or a popping cork,
definitely,
what have you, just to make sure it's like, they didn't just get used to seeing that one bait come by and by and by.
Right,
and by.
And it pays off to do what you're talking about sometimes.
Sometimes,
a lot of times, honestly, maybe gets you one more fish or two more fish. I don't know if I've ever had it like fully trigger like a new bite.
No, I haven't either, but it can definitely get you a couple more.
But I have like gone in there and thrown like a mirror lure or like a heavy dean and caught 2 or 3, and then I put a DOA shrimp on and I catch like 15 of them out of there. So if the DOA shrimp is your cleanup, then you will maybe catch more, start a new bite. But if you start with the DOA, a lot of times you might not be able to clean much up afterwards. They kind of sweep the floor pretty good. Like I said, one of these days, DOA is just going to send me a check in the mail, I think.
You and Ben Chesney.
Me and Ben Chesney. No, I'm just kidding. That's a great bait, and I will buy them as long as they are made. But I'm trying to think. Is there anything else that we can talk about? There's a lot we can talk about, but
I think it might be good to cover like how it transitions from early summer into late summer.
Yeah.
Because I struggle in late summer, and it's mainly, I feel like, due to just not getting out there early enough.
Yeah.
And I just think that the time of day ends up being pretty important as the water heats up. That if you're not out there like super early, it can get kind of tough to catch trout like midsummer.
Yeah, for sure. I think they feed really, really good on when that water temperature is around what it's at right now, like 68 to 73. And again, a lot of times though they'll eat a big meal like early in the morning, like going and throwing a big Swimbait or a big topwater plug in those areas. You can get those fish to eat in the summertime. But again, I've had days where I've caught them good, like heat of the summer, that they get a little feed on in a certain area. But yeah, I think starting early and picking your times of the tide to fish is important. And that's the cool thing about trout and redfish, at least the way I like to fish for redfish and how I fish for trout, is they're at separate tides. Like the low end of the fall and the early end of the rise is when I'm red fishing usually, and there's definitely some areas that trout fish really well during that time frame, but that mid tide, honestly, like the tail end of a fall and mid incoming are my 2 favorite times to trout fish right now. Like that last little bit of falling water, and then mid falling can be really good. And then there's other areas that completely break that rule, but as a rule of thumb, that's kind of the thing. But I'm with you, man. It's like you got to get your butt up out of bed and go throw that topwater in the morning early in the summertime sometimes to get those fish, but you'll catch some big ones. Yeah. We have more trout, summer here than a lot of people think we do. People just stop fishing for them. There's just like this weird theory that we don't have them this time of year, at least not in targetable numbers, but that's not true at all.
I think too, a lot of people feel like summer is like red fishing time. Right. Which is kind of funny to me, because for me, like, summer might be my least. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love catching redfish on topwater, and I like fishing for singles as well, for sight fishing singles. Yeah. But man, it can humble you in the summer.
It can, dude.
Good. Like, you're like, man, conditions are perfect, water's clear, this bank looks great, and you're like, where are the redfish?
Exactly. They're all sitting in like 25 feet of water on some structure, just going to town on whatever they want to down there. But
Yep.
No, I'm with you, man. That's what makes this transition time so hard. We're coming out of winter where like you're usually catching 20 fish in a day to like, all right, mindset change. It is
Yeah.
cool to catch those singles belly crawling down the bank, but God, where is one belly crawling down the bank?
Yeah, man, it gets
It can
tough.
be the you
But
can
then
have those days.
I feel like it comes in waves, and you know this more than I do. But like you'll get like a week or so where the red fishing's like they're doing everything that you want them to do,
Right.
and then the next week you're like, where the hell did they go?
That's a very true statement there. Um, I can get very frustrated this time of year. I had a frustrating day today. We caught the redfish really good this morning, and I had my father-in-law on the boat this afternoon with his uncle, who's his 90th birthday. So we had put this on the calendar a while back to get him out and to catch some redfish. And this is like guide truth moments, like laying it all out there. Like I don't always catch fish. So we caught him really good this morning on a couple of areas, and they were whacking the jig like every cast. We were just blind casting jigs and slow rolling back to the boat. And we like weren't setting the hook, and we we'd get 3 or 4 bites in a spot and be like, all right, we're gonna leave this alone. We'll roll out. Like we'd hook a fish, and then we'd just kind of shake a couple other ones off, and be like, all right, there's multiple redfish there.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wanted to save it for my afternoon with my father-in-law. And I cast net a bunch of pogies, got some fresh shrimp from Seaview Crab Company, and I was like, oh, we're going to go smack them. And fish for 3 hours with them and didn't get a dang redfish bite the whole time. And that's when it's like, that's my downfall sometimes of like if I get so hard-headed. And granted, we didn't have the ability to do a bunch of moving. We just kind of, I wanted it to be an easy boat ride, an easy time for Augie, who was the older guy that was with us. But I should have just, as soon as I spent an hour on that stuff and it wasn't working, I should have just, rerouted and done something different. But I just, I kind of was like, died by what I thought was going to work. And we caught some freaking massive croakers. But we did catch speckled trout. But that was it. It was very slow. And I had a slow day yesterday too, man. I had a tough trip. The day before was really, really good. Caught a ton of trout.
Yeah.
But tomorrow I'm going to trout fish a little bit on my own in the morning, and then I got a fly trip for redfish. So hopefully tomorrow my spirits will be higher. I spent a lot of money on a new motor today, so I need something to brighten my day.
Yeah. This time of year is tough, man. I still don't feel like I don't know if there is any like figuring it out like you somewhat can in like winter and spring and fall. Just because I feel like those fish are just on the move, figuring out where they want to hang out,
Sure.
and start to get like, I don't know, maybe they get like water temperature sensitive already, but although I don't really feel like it's gotten hot enough for that.
No, I don't think they do, man. I've seen them busting bait in 90-degree water in the summertime.
Oh yeah, no, no, you're right. So like some of those.
But quick changes can do it.
Yeah, but no, you're right. I've been pulling in a little creek that on my GPS was reading like 90-something degrees, and it was loaded with redfish. And you're like, okay, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you put your hand in the water and it's like slimy. It's so warm.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for those days quite yet. It's so calm in the morning and your glasses are like fogging over. You have to like constantly move them down and put them. I'm gonna invent some sunglasses one day that have little
fans on them.
Yeah, that have little fans that keep them clear, or just little windshield wipers. Choo 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 choo. That'll be pretty awesome. But yeah, I think we'll wrap it up with that, man. That was some good stuff. I'm glad we got into the navionics stuff and the satellite imagery, because that is a huge part of how you and I do a lot of scouting before we're ever even on the water. And if you have any questions about any of that, definitely hit us up on Instagram, or you can leave a comment on the YouTube video.
Yeah.
But yeah, and again, we've had some slammed the past 2 weeks, but we're going to get that Patreon content pumping again here shortly. I've been busy just trying to get stuff ready for the summer guide season. A lot of doubles and not much free time. So, and I guess I was up in Weldon too for a couple weeks guiding up there, and wasn't able to record it there. I pre-recorded while we were up there, but we're getting back into a good schedule. We got some good guests lined up for some of the upcoming episodes. And that will be. I got one guest I'm really excited about, who's got a big TV show that hopefully a bunch of y'all, if you don't already watch it, you will be watching it. But yeah, thanks for hopping on here, Cameron. And
no worries, man.
Guys, go out there and try to catch some trout. Fish those areas that you've caught trout in, and then expand on that. And we will see y'all in the next episode. Later.